the girl the system ignored. Era: 1914 to 1918 World War I period. Elizabeth learned very early that men could leave, and the world would not stop them. But women had to survive the silence they left behind. Elizabeth Moore was born in a narrow brick house where sunlight entered only in the morning, and even then, reluctantly. Her mother used to say, "Light comes where it is allowed." Elizabeth never understood that sentence as a child. She would. Her father, Thomas Moore, left when Elizabeth was 6. Not for war. Not for duty. For another woman. There was no dramatic farewell. No final argument. Just a door closing one evening and never opening again. Her mother, Margaret, waited weeks before accepting the truth. Months before speaking it aloud. "He's not coming back," she finally said, one winter night, her voice flat, her hands red from washing other people's clothes. Elizabeth didn't cry. She watched. That was the beginning of her education. From the age of 7, Elizabeth worked. Not officially, children's labor laws existed on paper, but reality had its own rules. She helped her mother scrub floors in wealthier homes, carried baskets heavier than her own body, and learned how to disappear when employers didn't want to see poor children. She also learned something else. Poverty is loud inside the head, even when the room is silent. Yet Elizabeth studied. At night, under a weak oil lamp, she read borrowed books while her mother slept exhausted. History fascinated her, not kings and crowns, but wars. She noticed something disturbing. Men were remembered. Women were erased. Even when they suffered more, when World War I broke out, the streets filled with posters and promises. Your country needs you. Honor. Duty. Glory. Elizabeth was 14. She watched boys only a few years older march away, uniforms too big, faces proud and terrified at the same time. Her mother stitched military coats in a factory that smelled of sweat and metal. "War feeds on the poor first," Margaret said quietly one night. Elizabeth didn't disagree. But something stirred inside her, not excitement, not pride. Anger. Why should men decide wars and women only bury the dead? Elizabeth wanted more than survival. She wanted agency. When women were recruited into auxiliary roles, nursing, clerical work, logistics, Elizabeth tried to apply the moment she turned 18. She was rejected. Too young. Too untrained. Too female. The last reason was never written, but always present. She worked harder. Studied anatomy, mechanics, radio operation, anything she could access through night classes and borrowed manuals. Her hands became calloused. Her posture stronger. Her voice steadier. Her mother worried. "They don't protect girls like you," Margaret warned. Elizabeth replied calmly. "They never protected us anyway." A promise and a lie. In 1917, shortages forced the military to expand women's roles. Elizabeth was accepted, not as a soldier, but into a support unit attached to the army. It wasn't equality, but it was a door. The uniform felt heavy on her shoulders, not because of the fabric, but because of what it represented. She wrote to her mother, "I will be careful. I will come back stronger. I won't disappear." Margaret kept that letter folded in her coat for years. The military camp was nothing like the posters. Order existed, but so did cruelty. Elizabeth noticed how certain officers looked at female recruits. How jokes followed them into silence. How complaints vanished. Rules protected rank, not people. She learned quickly to stay alert. To document everything. To speak little and observe more. Still, she believed in duty. That belief would be tested. One evening, Elizabeth stood alone near the barracks, listening to distant artillery drills. She thought of her father, how easily he walked away. She thought of her mother, how survival had aged her before time. And she thought of herself. Not as a victim. Not yet. But as someone standing at the edge of a system that did not forgive women who stepped out of place. She whispered to the dark, "I will not vanish." The wind carried her words away. The system heard them. And it was already preparing to answer. Elizabeth quickly learned that the most dangerous place in the camp was not the training ground. It was the office. Doors closed there. Records changed there. Voices disappeared there. She worked long hours, inventory, radio logs, casualty lists. Names of men who would never return. Numbers that turned lives into ink. The officers praised her efficiency. Too much. Captain Edward Harrington noticed her first. "You're wasted on paperwork," he said once, standing too close. "A sharp mind like yours deserves guidance." Elizabeth stepped back. "I'm doing my duty, sir." He smiled. Thin. Calculated. "So am I." From that moment, she felt watched. Not protected. Measured. Elizabeth learned the rules no manual mentioned. Never be alone. Never protest too loudly. Never assume rank means honor. Other women warned her quietly. "Keep your head down," one whispered. "They won't touch you if you don't stand out." Elizabeth didn't know how to disappear. She only knew how to endure. At night, she wrote letters to her mother she never sent. Pages filled with half-truths and pauses. "I am safe," she wrote. Then crossed it out. It happened under orders. A late shift. A locked office. A command framed as procedure. Elizabeth would later struggle to describe that night, not because she didn't remember, but because the world lacked language that could hold both violence and authority at once. There were no screams. No witnesses. Only rank overpowering refusal. What remained afterward was worse than pain. It was disbelief. She walked back to the barracks like a ghost inhabiting her own body. Scrubbed her hands until they bled. Sat on her bunk until dawn. No one asked. The system worked as intended. Elizabeth reported it. Quietly. Carefully. Formally. The response was immediate. Not justice, containment. Her records were questioned. Her behavior scrutinized. Her reputation quietly reshaped. She's unstable. She misunderstood. She wants attention. Captain Harrington continued his duties. Elizabeth was reassigned. Isolation followed. Trauma did not make Elizabeth weak. It made her tired. She stopped sleeping. Flinched at footsteps. Avoided mirrors. But something else happened too. She began to observe. Patterns. Names. Timelines. She wasn't the first. She found whispers in old reports. Transfers after complaints. Medical discharges without cause. Women who left suddenly. Silence had a shape. And it repeated itself. Elizabeth started writing again, not letters, but notes. Dates. Signatures. Irregularities. Truth, she realized, did not need permission. It needed patience. When the Germans intensified bombardments, chaos followed. Communication lines failed. Panic spread. Elizabeth stepped forward. She rerouted signals. Restored contact. Coordinated evacuations. Lives were saved. Men noticed. So did command. For the first time, Elizabeth was visible for the right reasons. And she used it. She submitted her findings not as an accusation, but as evidence. Patterns attached to performance reports. Facts shielded by necessity. She spoke once more. This time, people listened. Captain Harrington was summoned for questioning. Not arrested. Not condemned. But no longer untouchable. Elizabeth stood outside the command building as rain soaked the ground. Her hands shook not with fear, but with release. She knew this was not victory. Only exposure. And exposure was dangerous. That night, she finally sent a letter to her mother. "They tried to make me disappear. I am still here." Margaret read it twice. Then prayed. Once Captain Harrington was questioned, the air around Elizabeth changed. Not warmer. Colder. She noticed it in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. In the way officers avoided her eyes. In the sudden politeness that replaced open hostility. She had crossed an invisible line. The system did not deny what happened anymore. It simply asked a new question. Was she worth the trouble? Elizabeth was reassigned again, this time to a forward medical logistics unit near the coast. Officially, it was temporary operational necessity. In truth, it was distance. Distance from witnesses. Distance from allies. Distance from attention. Margaret sensed it immediately when Elizabeth's letters grew shorter. "I am fine," she wrote. "Just tired." Mothers know when lies are mercy. The tribunal. The inquiry moved slowly. Painfully. Statements were taken. Counterstatements followed. Captain Harrington denied everything with the confidence of a man who had never faced consequence. He spoke of misunderstandings, of stress, of emotional instability among female personnel. Some believed him. Others wanted to. Elizabeth testified once. She did not cry. She did not dramatize. She spoke like someone who had survived something and refused to let it own her voice. Facts. Dates. Patterns. When asked why she waited, she answered calmly. Because silence was safer. Until it wasn't. That sentence entered the record. The war was ending. Men returned broken in visible ways. Missing limbs. Haunted eyes. Elizabeth worked among them, organizing supplies, managing evacuations, holding hands of strangers who would never know her story. Pain did not compete. It coexisted. One evening, an officer approached her quietly. "I should have spoken," he said. "I saw things." "I said nothing." Elizabeth looked at him. "You can still speak." He did. Others followed. Not heroes. Just people finally unwilling to carry the weight of silence alone. The inquiry widened. Harrington was suspended, then charged. Not only with abuse, but with obstruction, falsified reports, intimidation. The system began to protect itself by sacrificing one of its own. Elizabeth understood this too well. Justice, she learned, often arrives imperfect. The cost. It did not come without consequence. Elizabeth's career ended quietly. No commendation. No medal. No public apology. Her file read, "Service concluded due to circumstances." She returned home thinner, older, changed. Margaret opened the door and held her daughter without speaking. That was enough. The world moved on. Treaties were signed. Monuments built. Names carved in stone. Elizabeth did not seek recognition. She sought change. She began writing not memoirs, but reports. Articles. Letters to committees. Advocacy for women in uniform. For oversight. For accountability. Her words were calm. Unignorable. She was invited to speak, not everywhere, not often, but enough. Each time, she told the truth without spectacle. "This is not about one man," she said once. "It is about what happens when power is protected more than people." Slowly, policies changed. Not enough. But some. Years later, Elizabeth stood at her mother's grave, a folded letter in her coat pocket. Margaret had lived long enough to see her daughter stand unbroken. Elizabeth read the letter aloud to no one. "I was not brave because I was fearless. I was brave because disappearing would have been easier." She folded the paper. The wind carried nothing away this time. Elizabeth Moore was never written into textbooks. But laws changed because of voices like hers. Records survived because of women like her. And silence broke because someone refused to carry it alone. History remembers wars by dates. But progress is measured by people. Who stood up? When it cost them everything.